Hello and welcome back, and today I want to talk about the main advantages and disadvantages of Rackmount NAS Solutions and Desktop NAS Solutions. They've both got a whole heap going for them, and dare I say, a few things against them. And today I'm going to hopefully help you decide which one is best for you. But a few disclaimers straight off the bat. First and foremost, behind me, we've got lots of building work taking place just outside this building, and try as I might to remove all that background noise, some of it is almost certainly going to get through. So I apologise if some of the hums, clicks behind me, and some of the big old engines that are rolling by that window do get through, so I apologise in advance. Secondly, I am talking about Rackmount and Desktop Solutions irrespective of brand, and although I do have a QNAP here, the 873AU, and I do have a Synology here, the 1621 Plus, I will highlight that it doesn't make a blind bit of difference. Everything I'm talking about today, it's largely applicable to any NAS brand, so don't think this is a brand specific. This can be generally applied to any NAS out there. But let's talk about Rackmount versus Desktop. Well, first let's talk about Rackmount. What are the advantages of a Rackmount solution? First and foremost, generally, like for like, when you go through the entire product portfolios of any NAS brand, Rackmounts are more powerful. You'll almost certainly find a lot more Xeon processors out there, definitely 4, 6, 8 cores and higher, as well as loads more memory as well. There are some Rackmount solutions out there with 12 and 16 core processors that are actually available at the 10 to 20 grand mark, which is still a lot of money, admittedly so. But the idea that you will never get that in a desktop form is a real shame. Same goes with memory as well. Those bigger CPUs that allow, in some cases, terabytes of memory is something that's only available in a rack mount because of the sheer amount of physical space, and the horizontal cooling system they have inside means that these systems are just always going to be more powerful. And that's also because these systems are generally designed with high-end enterprise business in mind. We're seeing more and more small medium business or SMB players of hardware coming into the market with half-depth rack mounts like this one, but it's still nevertheless that like for like, rack mounts will always be more powerful, which leads us neatly into reason number 2, that rack mounts may be the better one for you, and that is generally they are significantly more upgradable. And again, the CPU is generally not upgradable, but the memory you can upgrade to significantly higher on a desktop. But those upgrades extend to more than that, with generally more PCIe slots on the rear of a rack mount solution. I've seen rack mounts with 4, 5 or even 6 PCIe upgrade slots on them. Rack mounts are the only devices I've seen to date that have PCIe 4 or Gen 4 upgrade slots as well. Generally, you do find that rack mounts have a larger degree of upgradability in their lifespan than their desktop counterparts. 1, because of the physical space allowed, and 2, because most business users are going to be utilising these devices significantly harder and for longer than that of their desktop counterparts. Consequently, the ability to add more network interfaces, the ability to add faster SSD drives internally are generally more included on these systems. The upgrades are far broader. Same goes for expandability as well, with in most cases rack mount devices being expandable several times over with larger capacity expansions for the most part, something desktops very rarely have. You sometimes get devices like this one that can attach 2 5-bay expansions, some of the more elite level ones like the 3617XS allowing 2 12-bay expansions, but that still pales in comparison to the wider range of expandability and upgradability options on even the most common garden rack mount NAS. Reason number 3, and we should turn this around for this, that you might want to go for a rack mount solution is redundant PSUs. Generally, rack mounts are the only server devices out there that have the ability to have more than one PSU on the rear. Now, the power supplier on any NAS device is the second most fragile part of the system. The first is obviously the storage media, because it's constantly going to be on. There's going to be read-write actions intermittently all the time, and the storage media is the most fragile part. But the second is most certainly the PSU. So if the PSU dies on one of these devices, that's game over. It's turned off, it's gone. You're going to have to wait until you get a new one to power the device up. But redundant power supplies arrive with 2 PSUs on the rear, so that means that with connecting the device to a mains power outlet with 2 PSUs on the rear simultaneously. If one of them dies, the other one is still maintaining the system. It's still powering it, and your end users, your clients, your staff, whatever, they're not going to notice. And then you can send this back while it's under warranty, or buy a brand new one, or just buy an extra one on day one and keep it on a shelf, and then you can slot it straight in. You don't even need to power the device down. Connect it in, reconnect the power cable. You've got your safety net. The idea of redundancy on NAS and general server devices has been around for a long time in RAID, with storage media, with dual controller NASs, with high availability, with NASs that have got 2 CPUs, 2 memory, 2 controller boards. That has existed for a long time. But by far, the one that's been around longer than any of the others has been 2 PSU devices. It is just easily one of the most reliable ways to take a hit and have a safety net there. And it's just something that I've never seen on desktop, apart from 3 isolated examples. When we saw a Thecus that had an internal battery that no one bought. There's Drobos that had an internal battery. And again, where are they right now? And then the WD Pro series of MyClouds that had 2 PSU ports, that had 2 external PSUs. But they only included 1 PSU and no one really used that feature. Ultimately, what I'm saying is Rackmount's rule the roost on redundant power supplies, and it's another big reason you might want to buy them. Reason number 4 that you may want to go for a rack mount over that of a desktop is warranties. Now, the majority of desktop NASs arrive with either 2 or 3 years of manufacturer's warranty, and that covers the hardware. Software is generally lifetime guarantees and warranties on it, but when it comes to the hardware, you're talking 2 to 3 years for the most part. There's the odd exception, like the XS series from Synology that has 5 years, but you obviously pay a premium. But the majority of desktop is 2 to 3 years, and a lot of these companies do include the ability to upgrade it to 5 years. Rack mounts, on the other hand, almost all rack mount devices, with the exception of the very low end, have 3 to 5 years warranty as standard. And that can be extended as well, but that 5-year warranty is because these are for business. It's because they are more enterprise. It's because they're more expensive. It's because they are meant to take a lot of hits. They're meant to be working non-stop with almost no idle. Be it for file shares, be it for backups constantly happening, be it for surveillance, be it for virtual machines. One way or another, these devices are going to be taking a lot more activity, and they need a warranty that says, we believe this product can take it non-stop and survive that number of years. So if warranty is a big deal to you, chances are a rack mount solution is going to be appealing to you more than that of a desktop. But let's flip the scales. Let's talk about desktop, because desktop still has a lot to bring. And personally, I do actually prefer desktop to rack mount, but that's because I don't run an enormous widespread hyperscale environment. But let's talk about the advantages of desktop over rack mount. Reason number 1 that you might want to prefer a desktop solution, it's just got a lower power use, not just the lack of a redundant power supplier and the lack of those higher end components. Rack mounts consume more power. They are these big hulking devices that use a horizontal airflow system because they're stacked. There's very little cooling on the side, no cooling top or bottom. The air has to pass through the middle, which means the internal components, the rear cooling fans there, internal fan arrays generally held behind that of the hard drive media, are consuming way more power because they've got to be on non-stop. On top of that, the boards that are generally used inside, the server class ones, have to take a hit, and therefore they have a lot more heat sinks on there and a lot of stuff generally drawing more power. And you can look at 8 bays like for like and generally find that the rack mount alternatives will have larger PSUs for that extra power utility around it. Don't get me wrong, it's not going to draw any power that it doesn't need. It's only going to use as much as it needs to run. But it's the idea that with those larger overheads internally, you are generally going to use more power on a rack mount than that on a desktop device of the same CPU and architecture. Reason number 2 that you might want to consider a desktop NAS overall, and you may have already alluded to this for the way I've been talking, is the noise. Even metal NASs like the 1621 here are still going to be quieter than this metal rack mount chassis. Almost all, and I do really mean with the exception of one to my mind, rack mount, the RS217, rack mount solutions are all metal through and through. Even the bays will generally always be metal. The front might have a little bit of plastic for the handles, but look, they are almost exclusively metal. in the external, and even the internals, with the exception of the motherboard, is largely all metal inside. The result is the clicks, hums and whirs of more enterprise class drives, which they do insist that you use. So if you use most rack mount devices, they will generally err you towards WD Red Pro, Seagate Iron Wolf Pro, Exos, these sort of drives, WD Gold as well, and Ultrastar. They will urge you to go for those higher class drives, which produce more noise generally anyway, due to their higher rotations per minute and their more enterprise rugged externals. Consequently, rack mounts are just noisier. You can put one drive in this and one drive in this. You ain't hearing this over this. It makes a lot more noise. It's a reason that rack server cabinets are generally held in a dedicated room in most office environments. You just can't work around them. I've got a rack cabinet just out of shot over there, and I wouldn't dream of turning it on when I'm making a video. It's just not feasible. And if you are sensitive to noise or do work in a smaller work environment, small office, you have a shop that has thin walls, you're going to hear this. So if that's a problem, go for a desktop. Next, and this one should be fantastically obvious, reason number 3 that you might want to go for a desktop is the scale. Look at the size of it. It's tiny. Now, yes, that's a 6-bay, that's an 8-bay, but generally you find that desktop devices are much, much smaller for the same amount of storage capability to that of a rack mount. Now, I say smaller, let's also get a bit maths about this. These devices, if you look at their volume, is actually quite similar. In this case, because it's a half-depth rack cabinet at 30 centimetre, and we put these on top of each other, the actual storage isn't hugely different. This is not as tall, so you have to factor in the height difference between these two devices, and I'm sorry this is quite close to the mic, but in terms of volume, these two are actually quite similar. But it's worth highlighting that the majority of rack devices are not half depth like this one. The majority of rack mount devices are significantly deeper, and they factor into this is a 2U, but they can go 3U and higher, and generally rack mount devices are just bigger. And if space is a problem, a desktop NAS is going to be so much more efficient for you. And of course they arrive in 2 and 4-bay devices. The majority of rack mounts start at 4 bays. There's a couple of 2-bay exceptions which I'm not going to bore you with, but generally, if space is a concern, desktop is definitely going to be the one for you. And finally, the big advantage overall, probably more than any of the others that occurs to most people, but I've stuck it on the end anyway, the price. Desktop NASs are just more affordable. Whether you call it business tax or you call it idiot money, whatever you want to call it, rack mounts are going to cost more. Now, like for like, we've compared the 1821 Plus versus the 1221 Plus. We have compared the 8-bay QNAP series, the 873AU versus non-rack mount comparative versions, and generally, rack mounts will cost somewhere between £300 to £500 more, scaling against the 4, the 8, the 12-bay, etc. That's a lot of money. Now, one might argue that extra money has gone into the physical nature of a rack mount device. One might argue that a rack mount device, because it's got the scalability of more PCIEs, or the ability to add more memory, or the warranty's a bit longer, kind of justifies that price. Maybe it does. It doesn't always thread through equally. Some devices are more similar than others, but there's still no avoiding that a rack mount solution is going to cost you more. It's going to cost you more if you need to get rails. It's going to cost you more if you need to put it in a rack cabinet. It's going to cost you more generally in a number of ways than a desktop. So it's not just the bare metal cost. It's the cost of the surrounding environment and the network peripherals and the surrounding physical environment that will ultimately make a desktop noticeably lower in price, both in day 1 and day 1000, than that of a rack mount. And you shouldn't really be looking at rack mount if you're on a tight budget anyway, but nevertheless it is something worth highlighting. But this has been the main advantages of rack mount and desktop NAS server solutions. If there's something I've missed, do let me know in the comments, but if you've enjoyed it, click like. If you want to learn more about these subjects, click subscribe, and do visit the guys at span.com for the right data storage solution for you, and visit myself at NAS Compares below, where we've got loads of guides on choosing the right NAS solution for you. Just go down there and read through them. There's a lot to get through, but it will help you. I will see you next time.